been honest with the public about UFOs? A panel of 6 former members of Congress is getting an earful in Washington this week about UFO incidents and government secrecy.
The citizens' disclosure hearing isn't an actual congressional proceeding. It just looks like one, but its backers hope it generates enough attention to force U.S. officials to disclose whatever they might know about UFO mysteries.
George Knapp of the I-Team says there's at least one big surprise coming this week.
Yeah, it's a good one, too. People tend to forget that back in the 1960s, there were 2 congressional hearings into the UFO question. Future President Gerald Ford was a driving force behind the hearings. All this week, a panel of former members of Congress is hearing from military and intelligence officials, as well as historians and scientists, about all aspects of the UFO enigma. The organizers hope the citizens' hearing on disclosure adds an element of legitimacy to the UFO discussion and perhaps leads to the lifting of what they call the veil of secrecy.
Because there is no doubt we are being visited.
Scientist and explorer Dr. Edgar Mitchell, born coincidentally in the UFO hotspot of Roswell, New Mexico, started calling for the disclosure of government UFO files back in the mid-90s. One of his first interviews on the subject was with the I-Team. As the 6th man to walk on the moon, he's an American icon with extensive contacts in the government who've convinced him a UFO cover-up is real. Mitchell says it's time for full disclosure.
And I call upon our government to open up like other governments have, and you will hear about that this morning. Like the Belgians have, the French have, the Brazilians have, the Argentines, the Mexicans have all released their files. It's about time now that we do the same thing.
Mitchell will be one of several heavyweight witnesses who will testify at this week's 5-day UFO disclosure event in Washington. A panel of 6 former members of Congress will hear from and question 40 witnesses, including Paul Hellyer, who was the Minister of Defense for Canada and who's had his own UFO sighting. Hellyer says there's no question the U.S. has withheld information about UFOs from the public and from its allies.
To make a plea for full disclosure, because the implications of what has been going on secretly in the last 50 or 60 years are really profound, and most people haven't any idea how important the revelations could be to their future as a species.
One focus of the citizens' hearing will be recent admissions by other governments that there have been secret but ongoing UFO studies by military and intel agencies all over the world. Nick Pope was, for years, the UFO point man for Britain's Ministry of Defense and will testify about the release of his country's once secret files. Canadian nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman will tell the panel about military studies of UFO incidents and attempts to suppress the information, including the infamous Roswell UFO crash case.
The U.S. government has denied the truth to the American people about the ET presence. That's a big deal. It's no longer justified. And so the purpose of this hearing is nothing less than disclosure.
We're going to conduct a citizen hearing on disclosure.
Stephen Bassett, the only UFO lobbyist on Capitol Hill, organized this hearing, hired for the panel former members of Congress who had not taken public positions on the UFO topic, and chose the National Press Club to house the event so that official Washington would take notice. Congress held 2 hearings on UFOs back in the 60s, but the subject has seemed politically toxic since then. Bassett thinks that's not an accident.
The real problem is this, I've said many times. The military intelligence complex has yanked the issue out from under the political leaders. They don't brief them anymore. They don't give them the information, and that's true across the board of many issues.
Tuesday's session focused on one of the most disturbing angles, the intrusion of UFOs over nuclear bases. Former military men stationed at Bentwaters nuke base in England and at missile bases near the Canadian border described chilling incidents in which unknown craft interfered with the launch codes of atomic weapons. Documents squeezed out of the Pentagon show the military long ago considered UFOs to be serious business, but later denied having any interest in the subject.
I've got probably a few more months to make it before my kidneys shut down.
Still to come, surprise testimony from a mystery witness, the deathbed confession of an intelligence officer who worked at secret facilities in Nevada. Only a handful of people even know who he is, but the story he will tell is startling. Ed Mitchell, for one, urges an end to secrecy.
There seems to have been, over the last 50 years at least, and more, a great deal of secrecy surrounding the so-called UFO event. It's a very complex subject. We're not dealing with something that's very simple here.
The citizens' hearing continues all week, and for a small fee, you can watch the whole thing online. We have a link on our website, along with a background report on this hearing, the full schedule of witnesses, along with a lot of other UFO-related material, including a couple of stories we've reported over the years. Keyword UFO.